day. I was thinking, I recall.
Well, yeah, but something you memorized maybe as a child, you might still know. It's kind of weird how that works in your mind. Uh, well, how is Tate doing? You talked to him lately?
I texted him last night, but I hadn't heard from him in about a week. I figured he'd get a hold of me today, and he did.
Okay. Well, we are going to start studying the book of Ecclesiastes. We won't. Well, I don't know. We'll just see how it goes. I mean, I hate to say we'll go through it quickly, but then sometimes we tend to get caught up. Before we get there, though, I want us to turn to 1 Kings 12, kind of where we were. Actually, 11, the last of 1 Kings 11.
Can you tell me what the reason is for skipping over to Ecclesiastes?
We're not skipping. We're going to Ecclesiastes.
Well, we're in Kings, and you're going to Ecclesiastes.
Okay, so
I wonder if you had a reason for.
Well, yeah. Keep listening. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, so if you look at the end, and it actually shows at the start of chapter 12. You look over to the right, where you get your Thompson numbers. You won't have that. But where you have look to the right where you have Thompson numbers. Okay, it's mine. It's right in line with that Rehoboam's folly. Okay, you see the number there, the date.
It's on the right side?
Yeah. Well, it's on mine on the right side. It might be on your left side because the way yours is lined up.
Rehoboam 2983, 14.
Okay, what above? It's above the 2983. The date.
931.
931 BC. Okay, so those dates are compiled. They were a guy named Usher, and his dating is not quite as in vogue as it once was. However, the reason it's not in vogue is because most of the people that want to do Bible chronology, they're not firm believers in literal discussions in the Bible. So, to be honest, Usher's timeline is probably as good as anybody's I've ever seen. And if you look at it and scrutinize it, the one thing that he does, I actually agree with. Not everybody agrees with, but the concept, we'll look at that one of these days if you want to. How long were the children of Israel in Egypt? And the most common answer to that is usually 430 years. However, it doesn't really fit if you really scrutinize the details, and it comes out that it's probably more like 215 years. And even the archaeological evidence really seems to point to a 200-year time frame. Now, people say, well, it couldn't have happened that shorter time. But let's see, 215 years, our country went to, well, that would have put us in the 1980s. How different was the U.S. in the 1980s from the 1776 time frame? Majorly different. Population exploded, and so the fact is, there is enough time, and you can go through some simple math exercises and see that they could have went from the 70 that went into captivity and come out, a couple million, and it really is not that difficult because, they lived a decent period of time, lived a little bit longer than we did, not a lot, but, Moses lived 120 years, and they had much larger families, and so as a result, and God had said he'd bless them and protect them, and they obviously were very healthy. And so they exploded in their populations. But be that as it may, Usher uses the the 215-year time frame they was in Egypt, and as a result, some of the dates are different than most of your your timelines use the 430. And the problem with that is it doesn't fit prophecies. It doesn't fit the lineage that's given in the genealogy that's given in the Bible. And so you're left with saying it's 430 years because, and so as a result, there's a lot left out, is what you're ultimately going to have to say. But it doesn't fit the prophecies because it says the fourth generation, they would be free. So it simply doesn't fit everything. So either it wasn't literal, which brings up a lot of problems if it's not literal when it talks about that, or it actually, if you can fit it in the 215, then 215 is actually, I think, more. Anyway, Usher is very good on his timelines, and that's what Thompson used for all his timelines. And so 931 BC. Okay, turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. I remember that date, 931. We talked about memory. Y'all said you had great memories. Okay, so Ecclesiastes. No, I was there. Okay. And look to similar spot. It'll say the heading All is Vanity of chapter 1, and what date is given there?
935.
935. Now, it does have a question mark here, so he's not as convinced. There's nothing that can absolutely, you can look at it and you can fix Ecclesiastes to a specific date. Whereas when Solomon died, there are actually some things that they can tie that to. There's events that took place, the building of the temple, the other things that physically tie Solomon. And in fact, it even says how long it was. Anyway, so there are things that they can absolutely date the 931. The 935, though, is a good estimate or guesstimate, I guess we would say it. And 935, 931. So what timeline difference is it? 4 years. Okay, so Solomon dies, if this date is right, about 4 years after the book of Ecclesiastes is written. Well, who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes?
According to this preacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It'd be Solomon.
It'd be Solomon, and we'll go into that. But yeah, so Solomon wrote it. Solomon wrote it not long before he died. However, this is written after many of the things that took place. Now, what are some things that Solomon got into, and it talked about his heart finding Ecclesiastes?
Yeah, a little bit.
Ezekiel. It's on the other side. You're going look in the wrong direction. Went too far now. Got Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Psalms pretty much right in the middle of the
Might
Bible.
not be in here. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
That's Psalms up there.
yeah. So you're going the wrong direction now. You gotta go this way. Keep going. Keep going. Proverbs. Okay, it's the next book. You're in Ecclesiastes now. Okay,
What channel?
channel 1. Okay.
Gotta go back one page.
They stuck together on.
Yeah, they're real thin pages.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, obviously they had something to do this morning.
There it is.
Okay, so 935, 931, 4 years. So why are we studying the book of Ecclesiastes? So the last we saw Solomon, Jeroboam is going to be the future king to the 10 tribes. But Solomon's son is going to still retain 1 tribe, 2 tribes. Anyway, 10 and 2, although that's not literal. We talked about that some last week. But so Solomon, the last we read about him, his heart had left God. Why? Women. Yeah. And he built them stuff for their gods, and he got all this stuff. So that is at one point in his life. However, by the time of Ecclesiastes, only roughly 4 years or so before he dies, he changes. Okay? Do we change as we age, especially if we've made some big mistakes? Sometimes our mistakes are too late to not sustain the consequences of our mistakes. David saw that. The consequences of his sins caused family problems throughout his whole life. Solomon, these would have severe consequences for him because the country would be torn in two because of what he did. We see today people, maybe when they're younger and have families, they do things that, woeful mistakes. You see the people that get into drugs, alcohol, whatever it may be, and their family becomes separated, but they change, but yet there still may be consequences of that. It's hard to get back what you may have once had. Now, God always forgives us, but people sometimes don't. And sometimes even they forgive you, it's hard to get that same level of relationship that you may have once had. So Solomon is a changed person. Why is it important to look at Ecclesiastes? Because it fills we're studying Solomon. So as it fills who Solomon became. He starts off great. He gets, he slides away because of the wives that he married that were foreign wives, i.e. they worship idols. And as a result, he went away from God, and then he came back. A lot of people have that same arc. I've known many people that were faithful members, and then they went AWOL for decades. And then at some point, they realize their mistake, and they come back. Known people that grew up in the church, never was baptized, and sowed their oats, as they may say. And then at some point, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, they return and they're become Christian and they're whatever. So we see this often. So it's good to study people like this. So you get your people like Joseph in the Bible. So what did Joseph do that was ever really, really bad or sinful? At least it's recorded. We don't really have anything.
More of his problem, if you looked at it from his brothers, was he was delivering messages, but they didn't like his message.
But what was really the problem there? It wasn't really the message he's delivering. What was their problem?
They were jealous.
They were jealous of Joseph. That's why they sold him. And so, when you get a message from God, I'm not going to hold anyone guilty for sharing it. So really is nothing. I mean, really nothing that he did, and Daniel, what did Daniel ever do that was just a big mistake, something that had to be repented of? Well, at least it's recorded. We don't have anything. And, there are people like it. Not that they were perfect individuals. I'm not trying to imply that. But the things that they fell short in didn't rise to being included in the Bible. It was, we probably all know people like that. From the time they're little, they're good kids, and they get older, and they, always seem to do the right thing in their whole life. But there are also, and so, there's things we can learn from them, obviously. You should live that way, but most don't quite accomplish that. So I think it's important to see people like Solomon that had the highest of the highs and then went down to the lowest of lows, but yet then redeemed himself towards the end. And there's going to be others that we're going to encounter like that. So, what we talked about was when we come across, so the Bible's not written in a chronological fashion. And so you get some sections of books that kind of are, but it's not. So when we get to points, so in other words, as we go on our study, we're going to get into some prophets. And so we're going to take a pause in the Kings or Chronicles, and we're going to go look at the prophets, what they said. And the reason that is because you can then see it in the time frame. So some of this about Ecclesiastes, it really, I think it means more when we see the fact that Solomon, this is during his time when he was down at the lowest, and he realizes that everything that he'd done was meaningless, vanity of vanities. And so it makes sense. It's understandable when you understand where he's come from. And so a lot of the, when we get to the prophets, it's going to be the same way. So you'll see the things that are going on in Israel, either the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom, and what's causing the problems at the time. And then you're going to segue to the prophet. And the message that he's talking about is primarily, first and foremost, to the audience of that day and age. And so you can see why he was talking about this or that, or why certain things he alludes to, why it was an issue or a factor. And so I think it's just a better way to actually learn the whole scope of what was going on instead of just taking a book at a time. We kind of do this with the New Testament a lot, although still I think it's good too. Ideally, when you're studying the book of Acts, when you get to certain things, you get to parts where Paul has written a letter to, say, Galatia or to Rome or whatever. It's good to kind of, okay, let's stop here. Let's go to those, because then you understand those things. He writes the book to the Romans. He writes the book to Corinth, and he talks about this collection. Well, and then in Acts 21 or so, he comes back and he is delivering that contribution that he talked about to the Romans, to the Corinthians as well. And so you see that coming together. And you understand that before that, he was trying to collect the money, and then when he collected the money, and then, of course, once he goes to Rome in prison, well, by the end of Acts, that's when he writes what's called the prison epistles. Okay, so does that make sense, Dale, while we're going to Ecclesiastes now? And so we're going to see this before he dies, okay? So what all took place? The people of that age would understand. Now, why isn't these things included in the Book of Kings? What do y'all think? Why do you think that what he writes here in Ecclesiastes wasn't put in the Book of Kings or Chronicles?
The topic.
Okay. Same thing with David. You don't see a lot of the Psalms included in when we're talking about David, and the reason being is the purpose of the Kings and Chronicles was to give a chronicle of the events that the king did, their actions, their whatever. Whereas David was inspired to write, Solomon was inspired to write Ecclesiastes, and so these are things that they're doing not necessarily totally related to their actions that they did as king. The Kings and Chronicles, they kind of keep it compressed to the actions that they did. So anyway, so that's also why we've got to kind of go outside and kind of look at it. Okay, so I did a sermon series, I think it was last year, on Ecclesiastes, and it starts off there in 1. We're in Ecclesiastes. We'll be here the rest of the time. The words of the preacher is what I call the series. And why do I call that? Well, the words of the preacher, verse 1, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And we know that, it has to be, it's Solomon who wrote it. There are some that suggest we can't really know, but there is no other one that fits. There's things in there, and we'll talk about it. But so I'm going to go through those watching online. They're going to see the slides from that. And the preacher, it's a word in the Hebrew. It's a noun meaning a collector of wisdom. Oh, there is Mr. Reed.
Not too late.
No, we got coffee still.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's been running ragged. Monday's the only day I got to do anything else.
We'll get you some coffee. Coffee always helps. But the word preacher, kohelet, and I'm not as good on my Hebrew, so I probably butchered it. But anyway, it's a noun meaning a collector of wisdom, a preacher. The word, anyway, let's see, there's some other stuff. It's translates Hebrew word. There's another meaning word based on the fact that the preacher gathered knowledge to speak a lot. Solomon used the word to describe himself as one who gathered wisdom. And in fact, there's other passages. How do we know this is almost certainly Solomon? Well, he described himself this way in 1 Kings 4, 32 and 34, also in chapter 5, 12 through 14. So he described himself. But guess what? It's not translated preacher there. It's translated wisdom. So anyway, I don't know that. So apparently elders have to have weight and preachers have to have wisdom. So at least that's what Steve got.
I caught him.
Yeah, gotta have some weight.
Elder needs to carry some weight.
Yeah.
Rick ain't here. What's he trying to do?
Well, see, I should have used the fancy word. I should have said elders have to have some gravitas.
There you go. That's been, I understood that.
Yeah, gravitas. That's the aspect of weight that I'm talking
I almost
about. Yes.
stood up and said, well, preacher's got to have some weight.
Weight too, yeah. But no, we gotta have wisdom. See, preachers, according to Solomon, we gotta have wisdom. So, but it comes from the fact, what do preachers do? You go to any preacher's library or office, and although it's somewhat changes because I myself have a lot on my computer now, but what do you generally see in a preacher? You go into their library, and what do you find?
I would say commentaries.
Yeah, books and books and books and books. So, that's usually associated with people that are trying to learn and other things. So it does fit well in this on Ecclesiastes because he was someone that was all about wisdom and learning. And so it's kind of a colloquial term to translate it preacher. Words of the preacher. Like I say, he was someone that was considered wise. And it's going to come out, some of this, that, he had sought things that were wise his whole life. However, we've been talking about, we have segued out of 1 Kings for a while because somewhere there was about a 4-year time period towards the end before he dies that he wrote Ecclesiastes. And this is when he's had a change of heart because he had went the wrong direction. And so that's the last thing you see in Kings, and then he dies. And so he obviously understood the folly of his ways. And that's really what Ecclesiastes is about. So he'd been there, done everything. Now, I'll say this a lot of times. So how do we mean that Solomon was wise? In what ways was he wise?
It's supposed to be where he could to help the people that he's over.
Okay, govern his people, yeah. Administer that.
Peace.
And was he wise in that?
Yep.
Yeah, it was a time of peace, time of prosperity. In what ways doesn't it include wisdom? Wasn't he wise? Was he rather foolish?
He went against God's will with all the women.
Yeah, and so his heart turned away from God for a long time. And so I refer to Solomon as the wise, foolish man. And that was much of his life. He was the wise, foolish man. Now, do we have people today that we look at and say, oh man, they're wise, they're smart. I think of a perfect example in our land today is Elon Musk. And regardless of what you think of him, the man's a genius. And, people use the phrase all the time. So you don't have to be rocket scientist. Well, he is right. I mean, he's made these, just amazing rockets. But he's and you know what? If you look at his history, you know what the first company that he made. He had one company, and it was a predecessor. It kind of seems awful simplistic now, but it would give you. It's kind of like Yelp. And he sold it for a few $1 million, and then he went on to another venture. And it's like people were all worried about, well, I don't want Elon Musk having access to all my information and everything.
Already have.
He created PayPal, so and then sold it, and that's when he got into Tesla. Well, actually, he got into the rocket stuff first. I didn't realize that he actually started the space stuff before he ever got into Tesla, the EV car company. But smart man, but he's also very foolish. I think he's up to 13 or 14 kids now, and I think they're by about 4 or 5 women. And somewhere he told someone he may wind up having 100 kids by the time he's done. Well, I think Elon Musk is going to fit into this same thing like Solomon. He's as sharp as a tack, very smart, brilliant man, but he doesn't understand really what's important in life. And so some of us can be a lot wiser than Solomon ever was. But the fact is that Solomon was wise, and then he realizes the error of his ways, I think, is why it's important for us to oftentimes read the book of Ecclesiastes. And it also tells us it's never too late. As long as you're breathing, it's never too late to say, wait a second, this has been meaningless. And what's important is, the people that have it, in my mind, are the people that raise their family as a Christian, that have can keep their family together in a way that so many find difficulties in doing in life, and that aren't so consumed with money and power and ego that they're always doing what's best for them as a faithful Christian and their family as hopefully a collective. Those are the wise people in the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm not going to hold us too long, but I did want to talk about that and see, to me, we're not going to go through everything like I did in the sermon series, but when we get to things that are important, in verse 12 of chapter 1 says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that's done under the sun, and behold, all more churches said, yeah, that's who we want. But anyway, so him and the pulpit minister, on Wednesday nights, they took turns one year. They decided they'd go through the whole Bible, and each one would take turns on doing a little blip on each book that as they came rotation. And it was his turn to do Ecclesiastes. And he said, this is my least favorite book in all the I don't like this already. And then he said to him, the writer of Ecclesiastes sounds bipolar. He's up, then down, up, down. And I think it was just because he was too young to really understand. So what does Solomon mean when he says, I applied to my heart to seek and search out wisdom? It's an unhappy business. What do a lot of people do when they, they're young? How do most young people, I can tell you how, I know how, but how do most young people initially pick out what profession they think they want to do? Maybe even go back before they get out of high school. Is it what's going to be give them most content? Is it what is going to allow them to have more family time? Is it, the things that are actually important? But when you're young, what do you really want?
Money.
Money. I was, I mentioned this a little bit. I was really guided to, even my own dad did, as a preacher, he guided me to this. I was like, well, I always, when I was a teenager, I thought, yeah, I want to be a preacher. I thought that'd be a thing to be. And no, you don't really want to be a preacher. It's hard. And then, I did so well in school and stuff. They said, oh, you need to go in engineering. That's where the money's at. It pays really well. You've got the talent, because it's not easy, but you got the talent, you can do it. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll do engineering. I did like math, like science, but, and then even in engineering, it's like, they'd give you out statistics that first year, when you're trying to figure out which one you want to be. And it'd be like, oh, electrical engineers make more money. uh, or chemical engineers, they generally make close. And then civil engineer was down a little, lower. And I'm like, I want to be electrical engineer. So I started being electrical, worked for civil engineering, found out that civil engineers, unlike the others, licensing is very important. So they start off lower, but when they get licensed, they come up pretty close. And then the thing about civil engineers, they can own their own business. So when I found that out, I'm like, hey, that's what I want to do. I want to own my own business, But anyway, it's about the money. It's like, oh, I want to do that because it pays more. Now kids who got the next level is like, let's see, that pays a lot with only X amount of school. Don't want to be a doctor. That pays good, but you got to go to school forever, and then you're in debt. Let's see. Things like occupational therapists, that pays really well for the amount of schooling you do. Like, hey, that sounds good to me. Or, now even trades are becoming popular again because I don't even have to go to school. Don't have any debt, and I can make X amount of day. But that's what.
Wrong with the study now with the Generation Z. They're actually looking for. They want good employment, but they want a family.
They do.
No, they're looking for more time off as opposed to putting in long.
They are, but I've seen some of those studies with them. They have unrealistic expectations. They want to be able to work for a while, make good money, and then take a 6-month break, and then go back to work. And like, it don't work that way. Yeah,
That's all too, but they're trying to. There's a lot of them. They're setting early goals, and they're trying to retire at like 35 years
Yeah.
old,
yeah,
and but living very
frugal. Yes,
frugally,
yeah.
but which is just if you look at it, kind of a wise thing, a wise goal to have, but
It is and it isn't.
unrealistic.
It's unrealistic. It is and it isn't because we can't control where that future goes. Also, it's probably not a wise thing to retire so young and not have a purpose in your life. So anyway, but people do. They strive after all kinds of things that they think, oh, that's really what's important. I want to do this, do that. And Solomon said, I've done that. And guess what? It wasn't. It was unhappy, he says. What did he say? He said, it is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. We worry about this. We worry about that. Anxiety in today's younger people is through the roof. And it's because society forces them to be worried about everything. You better do good on your ACTs. You better, if you don't make a good GPA, and it even influenced schools. They have, they have inflated grading now where it's really hard not to make an A or B in just about every class now because, well, you don't want to hurt someone's chances of later on college or scholarships or whatever. And so it has totally dictated that people are forced, kids now have to start deciding kind of what they want to major in college when they're in 8th grade, because when you're in 8th grade, you've got to start really taking these special classes if you want to do well in X, Y, or Z. And so you better start thinking about what you're going to do. And so much pressure on things that will work themselves out. You don't have to worry about them. They'll be okay. But anyway, and so, Solomon talks about that. And so, I'm sure, I don't know if you've been around a lot of wealthy people. Some handle it better than others. But have you ever noticed that most people that are wealthy, I'm talking about that could not work another day in their life and have more than enough to do everything comfortable. Well, I knew one guy, and I thought the world of him. He's a good Christian too, but he was always watching the stock market. He was always trying to figure out a way that he could make more money. It becomes almost an addiction. You're always worried about, stock market bad. He'd be like, man, I lost. I'm like, man, you got plenty, it's like, and he did. And he's like, yeah, you're right. So I don't know. So I just can't, couldn't help it. But most people that get to another level of wealth, they're always thinking about, oh, well, I can make some money out of that. That's how they look at everything. It's like, I can make money out of that. And they're good at it. And so it kind of feeds itself. And Solomon, I think, because he was so wise, because he was so gifted at being able to lead his people in a way that's prosperous, it became an addiction in and of itself. Well, if I marry this wife from this country, they're going to give me all kinds of money. And it's going to be good and advantageous for us as Israel. We got a good trading partner. They're going to be really good to us. And indeed, it worked out from that side. So, but he said it's an unhappy business. You're never satisfied. And, Paul talks about being content with either you have a little or a lot. And too many people, especially in the country we live today, they're never content. They always want something else. You get that big screen TV and you're like, man, this is nice. And then you go to Sam's or to Walmart and you're like, well, that's nicer than what I got. It's like, it's bigger, huh? Man, what'd I do? You get a brand new car and you're like, man, this is nice. Look at all these gadgets. And then they come out with a new model and it's got even more gadgets. You're like, man, one of these that drives for itself, But anyway, so Solomon encountered that. And so and Solomon would change his ways. And so we'll see that, but we'll see how he talks about things being empty or vanity. So let's say you're near the end of your life. Say you got some kind of chronic illness and you're in a hospital bed, can't do much else. How much does it really matter how much money you got in the bank? What kind of cars you got in your garage? It really doesn't matter much. And some people, it takes them, sadly, to their deathbed before they realize that. Whereas others, like Solomon, at least came to that realization before they got that far down the road. So,
Wasn't he one of the wealthiest?
he may have been the wealthiest man ever lived. Like I said, just in what people gave him gold, it was $2.2 billion just in gold every year that they'd bring him out of the treasury. Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of gold. And then all these countries would give him all these gifts. Queen Sheba brought him, several $1 million of gold. And he, and that's not even the regular taxation and the regular stuff, the animals, all the property that he had, all the other things. So yeah, he very likely may have been the wealthiest man ever lived. Although today's time, wealth is something that people sometimes, what's really more wealthy, even in monetary standpoint? So someone, say you have a bunch of cash in the bank, you can turn around and do what you want to it, or someone that has a lot of stock, which is great, but in order to get to the money part, you've got to either sell your stock and then get it. So it's not quite as easy to unload it. You look at, some wealth. And by the way it's classified and really thought of, physical, tangible assets aren't as evaluated as highly as stock. So you got someone like, say, and he's had a history of talking about how badly Forbes evaluates his wealth, Donald Trump. Well, what does he have? He doesn't have a lot of stock because he's a private company, but he has land, resorts, and buildings in some really big time areas. And as a result, it's a different way to categorize. But, then some people will have whatever. So Solomon may very well, because he had tangible assets, is my point. he had actual gold, he had actual silver, he had actual jewels, he had actual land, he had actual buildings, and so was no stock market back then.
Yeah.
So he probably would have been good at that too, though, with his skills. So anyway, well, that's we will be into Solomon, Ecclesiastes. We'll probably get into be into chapter 2 next week. We're not going to do it, word for word. We'll get into certain things. Dale, I want you to get your guitar and everything ready, and when we come to Ecclesiastes 4. No, Ecclesiastes 3. I want you to sing it, for us.
I haven't played a guitar since
Well,
COVID hit.
we'll get the background music. You can do it karaoke style.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Ecclesiastes 3. It was the #1 hit. Rock song. Time to be born, time to die, time to plant.
It was a war song, wasn't
Well, yeah, I guess they thought it that way, but it's from the Bible.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you've heard the song.
I don't know. I don't
I
know
heard
what
it
song
the
you're
other
talking
night
about.
on
Yeah.
MeTV. Ed Sullivan show when it first came out.
The title of it was Turn, 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 and By the Birds. Spelled with a Y. They didn't know how to spell, but 1965. Good year.
I've heard it, but I can't remember how it goes.
Well, here. Is this song here?
Turn.
Oh, well, that's bad. Ain't them ads.
Commercial.
Yeah. Okay. Skip. Good 60s.
Been a lot of soundtrack.
Uh, Been movies. No, it's the Birds. They a little bit for the Monkeys, yeah. So
I usually play country and bluegrass.
Yeah.
That's
well, this has been but like I said, this has been movies and everything. But it actually it was #1 hit came out of the Bible. I mean, they didn't really change they do the turn, 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 but everything else just out of Scripture. It's kind of I think it's the only song like that. So that was a #1 hit. So
I remember it now.
So Solomon should get the writing credit.
Hmm.
I
Can't
think
remember the word. I remember it.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
you could have made money off of rock songs.
he could have made there you go.
Thousands of years later.
Think of how many books he could have written on the Proverbs, that he wrote. He could have done a book after pretty much each proverb. And we're not going to study the Proverbs, so they're kind of eclectic. They're so the truisms, the Proverbs. That's what a proverb is. But they it's a little to me. Most Psalms is a little easier, but Proverbs is very tough just to do a detailed study on because even in the same chapter, they're here, there, everywhere. So there's each chapter's got. It would take you forever to do a detailed study because you go on all kinds of tangents every few verses. Well, appreciate you being here. I assume Mark will be back next time, and we'll see how it goes next week. Lord willing, we're here next week.